Hello, everyone. Welcome back and thanks for joining us today. We have a brand new story to share with you. So let's get started. My name is Emma. I never thought a simple dinner conversation would change my life forever. Yet, there I was, sitting across from Daniel, my husband of 6 years, staring at him in complete disbelief as he casually dropped a bombshell on our marriage. "I think we should try an open marriage," he said, his tone light, almost too casual, as if he had just suggested trying a new restaurant for date night. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My fork froze midway to my mouth, and I blinked, trying to process what he had just said. Daniel, my husband, the man I had built a life with, was suggesting that we open up our marriage, that we invite other people into what was supposed to be a sacred, committed relationship. The worst part? He didn't look nervous, guilty, or even hesitant. His posture was relaxed, leaning back in his chair with an expression that bordered on expectant, as if he already knew what my answer should be. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry, what?" Daniel exhaled, as if he had to explain something simple to a child. "I just think maybe we should have more freedom, explore things. It could actually make our relationship stronger." My stomach twisted, a nauseating mixture of anger and heartbreak brewing inside me. Freedom? Explore things? This wasn't some new age relationship experiment. We were married. We had built a life together. And now he wanted to throw it all away under the pretense of strengthening us? I put my fork down, suddenly having lost my appetite. My hands curled into fists on the table, but I refused to let him see how much he had just shattered me. "That's not the marriage I signed up for," I said firmly, locking eyes with him. "If you're tired of this, just say it." I expected him to backtrack, to say something, anything, to reassure me that he hadn't completely lost his mind. But instead, he just shrugged. "I figured you'd say that," he muttered, as if he had already prepared himself for my answer. As if it didn't matter. And then, just like that, he stood up, picked up his plate, and walked away. I sat there, staring at his empty chair, feeling like I had just been blindsided by a train. This wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a request. It was a decision he had already made. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing, trying to piece together all the signs I had ignored. The late nights, the distant conversations, the way he had started spending more time on his phone. Was he already seeing someone? Was this open marriage just a way to justify something he had already been doing? The next morning, I woke up to an eerie silence. No good morning, no usual small talk over coffee. When I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was already there, scrolling through his phone, sipping his coffee like nothing had changed. I waited for some kind of acknowledgement. A glance, a nod, a single word. Nothing. "Morning," I finally said, testing the waters. He didn't even look up. Just took another sip of his coffee and kept scrolling. That day at work, I checked my phone multiple times, expecting a casual text from him. Something, anything, to break the silence. Again, nothing. At dinner, the air between us felt thick, suffocating. The man I had loved for years, the man I had built a home with, now treated me like I was nothing more than a roommate he barely tolerated. But it wasn't just emotional detachment. Over the next few days, his behavior escalated. Daniel stopped pretending altogether. He started dressing better, wearing expensive cologne, and spending more nights out. He stopped making excuses for why he wasn't home, and when I asked, he'd just smirk and mutter, "Why do you care?" "I care because I am your wife." But he didn't see me as that anymore. I was no longer the love of his life. I was an afterthought. And the worst part? I had no idea just how deep this betrayal ran. The house felt colder than ever. The silence between Daniel and me wasn't just unspoken words. It was a chasm too wide to cross. He had built a wall of indifference so high that I could no longer see the man I had married. I tried to ignore the red flags at first. The late nights, the subtle smell of perfume that wasn't mine, the way he avoided my gaze when I asked simple questions like, "How was your day?" Then the lies started. "I had a late meeting," he would say, slipping off his jacket without looking at me. "Got caught up with the guys." "You're overthinking things." At first, I believed him, or maybe I wanted to believe him, but the truth was staring me in the face. I just wasn't ready to confront it until one night when the final string snapped. Daniel came home at 2:14 a.m. His footsteps were unsteady as he walked through the front door, and when he saw me waiting on the couch, he had the audacity to look surprised. "What are you doing up?" he asked, shrugging off his coat. I studied him. His hair was slightly messy, his tie loose around his neck. And the worst part? He didn't smell like home. He smelled like someone else. My stomach twisted. I had spent weeks, months, convincing myself that I was being paranoid, that the emptiness in our marriage was just a phase. But this wasn't paranoia. This was reality. I needed proof. So the next evening, when Daniel grabbed his keys and mumbled something about another meeting, I didn't question him. I just nodded and let him leave. But as soon as I heard his car pull away, I grabbed my own keys and followed. My hands trembled on the wheel, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and certainty. I knew I was about to find something that would change everything. And I was right. Daniel didn't drive to the office. He didn't meet up with any friends. Instead, he pulled into a high-end lounge in the city, a place we had once gone together on anniversaries, back when he still looked at me like I was his world. Now, he walked inside without hesitation, like this wasn't his first time. I parked a few spaces away, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I could have driven away, pretended I hadn't seen anything. But I was done pretending. I took a deep breath, stepped out of my car, and walked inside. The moment I saw him, my stomach dropped. Daniel sat at the bar, leaning in close to a woman. She was younger, beautiful in an effortless way, with long, dark hair and red lips curled into an amused smirk. She touched his arm, laughing softly, her eyes never leaving his. And Daniel? He looked at her the way he used to look at me. A cold, numbing sensation spread through my chest. There it was. The truth I had tried so hard to ignore, laid out in front of me like a cruel joke. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. If Daniel thought he could gaslight me into believing I was imagining things, he was wrong. My heart pounded as I turned on my heel and walked out. When I got home, I stared at the picture on my phone for what felt like hours. This wasn't just about cheating. This was about disrespect, about betrayal, about the fact that he had already moved on. He just hadn't told me yet. But he didn't need to, because I had already made my decision. He thought I would cry, beg, cling to him. He had no idea that I was about to be the one to walk away first. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic tick of the clock, counting every second that passed. Daniel was still out, with her. My mind spun with questions, but the answers no longer mattered. I had seen everything I needed to see. There was no salvaging this marriage. By the time I heard his car pull into the driveway, my pulse had settled into a steady, chilling calm. I didn't feel like a broken-hearted wife. I felt like a woman who had just woken up from a long, cruel dream. The front door creaked open. His footsteps were slow, careful, like he was trying not to wake me. He had no idea I was sitting in the dark, waiting. I watched as he shrugged off his coat, his phone still in his hand, his fingers moving across the screen. probably texting her one last time before slipping into bed next to his wife like nothing had happened. I cleared my throat. Daniel flinched. His head snapped toward me, his body stiffening in the dim light of the living room. "You're up," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I couldn't sleep," I replied smoothly. His eyes flickered over me, searching for something, anger, sadness, confrontation, but I wasn't giving him the satisfaction. Not yet. "Everything okay?" he asked. I almost laughed. "Everything okay?" He was standing in front of me, his tie loosened, his shirt slightly wrinkled, his lips still tinged with the faintest hint of red lipstick, and he had the audacity to ask if everything was okay. I smiled, let him believe I was still in the dark. "Yeah," I said, standing up slowly. "Everything's fine." Daniel visibly relaxed. He had no idea I had followed him, no idea I had pictures, no idea I had already made up my mind. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, the same way he had done 1,000 times before, but this time I turned my head at the last second, and his lips met the cold air instead. He frowned, but didn't say anything. Instead, he murmured a good night and disappeared into our bedroom. I didn't follow. I sat back down on the couch, staring at my phone screen. The picture of him and his mistress burned into my retinas, but I refused to let my emotions take control. I needed to be smart. I needed to plan. The next morning, Daniel was already at the table when I walked into the kitchen, sipping his coffee like nothing had changed. I poured myself a cup, sat across from him, and waited. I needed to see something, if he had even an ounce of guilt, of shame, of regret. But he didn't. Instead, he scrolled through his phone, completely at ease, humming under his breath, not a care in the world. I took a sip of my coffee, my fingers tightening around the cup. That was all the confirmation I needed. Daniel had already checked out of this marriage. He just hadn't had the guts to tell me. I glanced at my wedding ring, the one I had worn proudly for 6 years, the one that once symbolized love, loyalty, and partnership. Now it felt like a shackle. I exhaled slowly, setting my coffee down. The woman sitting across from Daniel wasn't his wife anymore. She was his opponent. I pushed my chair back and stood up, smoothing my hands over my dress. "I'm heading out for a bit," I said. Daniel barely looked up. "Okay." He didn't even ask where I was going. I grabbed my purse and walked out the door, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. But I wasn't just leaving for fresh air. I was heading to see a divorce attorney. It was time to rewrite the ending to this story. I drove in silence, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The early morning sun painted golden streaks across the windshield, but I felt nothing. No warmth, no peace, just a quiet, burning rage that simmered beneath my skin. I had made my decision. I was done playing the fool. The sleek glass doors of the law office reflected a woman I barely recognized. Gone was the trusting wife who once believed in forever. In her place stood someone sharper, colder, someone who had learned the hard way that love could be a lie. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" I nodded. "I'm here to see Miss Callahan." Moments later, I found myself sitting across from the divorce attorney. She was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, with dark eyes that didn't miss a thing. As I explained my situation, her expression remained unreadable. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "So, let me get this straight. You suspect your husband is cheating, you've gathered photographic evidence, and you're looking to initiate divorce proceedings?" I nodded. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good. You're taking control before he does." The next 30 minutes were a blur of legal talk. She outlined what I needed to do: secure my finances, document his movements, make sure I had every piece of evidence lined up. If he's been this careless, Ms. Callahan mused, flipping through the pictures on my phone, he's not going to see this coming. That thought should have satisfied me, but all I felt was emptiness. How had we ended up here? How had the man I once loved turned into a stranger? I shook off the sentiment. Number. Not today. Today, I planned my escape. The second move. When I got home, Daniel was exactly where I left him, lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. He didn't even glance up when I walked in. It was infuriating. I stood there for a moment, watching him, letting the weight of my decisions settle in my bones. This man, this marriage, it was already over. The only thing left was for me to win. That night, I made my second move. While Daniel was in the shower, I slipped into his office. I had no intention of confronting him, not yet. Instead, I did something far more powerful. I opened his laptop. His password was the same as always, our wedding date. The irony made me sick. The screen flickered to life, revealing his emails, his messages, his secrets. And there it was, her name, Rachel. He had been careless. There were dozens of messages, conversations that stretched back for months, explicit, shameless, cruel. Daniel had poured his affection, his time, his energy into this woman, all while treating me like a ghost. I took screenshots, sent them to my private email, and closed the laptop. I could hear the shower turning off. I stepped out of the office and made sure nothing was out of place. When Daniel walked into the bedroom, towel slung around his waist, his eyes met mine for a brief second before he looked away. I almost laughed. He didn't even know. Didn't know that I had just found everything. Didn't know that I was already making plans to leave him in the dust. He thought he was in control. He had no idea what was coming. For the next few days, I played my role perfectly. I smiled when needed, made small talk at dinner, and acted as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was watching, waiting, plotting. Daniel had no idea that I had already seen everything. The texts, the emails, the pictures. He thought he was untouchable, but he was about to learn exactly who he was messing with. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, I casually asked, "Hey, I was thinking about planning a weekend getaway for us. Just the two of us. It's been a while, don't you think?" Daniel barely looked up from his phone. "Oh, yeah, sure." I gritted my teeth. He wasn't even pretending anymore. The man who once couldn't go a day without kissing me before work, who used to hold my hand while watching TV, now treated me like an afterthought. "Great," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll start making plans." I wasn't lying. I was making plans, just not the kind he expected. The setup. That night, while Daniel was asleep, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. I took my phone and scrolled through his messages again. There it was, proof that he was meeting Rachel this weekend at a hotel. Perfect. I took a deep breath and sent an email to my lawyer. Subject: urgent, finalizing divorce strategy. I attached everything: the messages, the proof of his affair, financial records showing his reckless spending, and a note saying I was ready to move forward immediately. I knew Daniel. He was careless, overconfident. He thought I was weak. He thought I'd cry and beg when I found out. But I wasn't going to cry. I was going to make him regret ever underestimating me. The confrontation Saturday morning arrived, and Daniel was unusually nice. He came into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and smiled at me. A real smile. For a moment, I wondered if he could feel it, the noose tightening around him. "I was thinking," he said, sipping his coffee, "we should do something special soon. Maybe go out for dinner next week." I almost laughed. He was already preparing excuses, setting up the next manipulation. He thought if he threw me breadcrumbs, I'd be too distracted to notice what he was really doing. Instead, I just nodded. That sounds nice. Daniel leaned down and kissed the top of my head. And that was the moment I realized I felt nothing. Not anger, not love, not sadness, just certainty. The man standing in front of me, he was already gone. Checkmate that afternoon, Daniel left for his business meeting. I followed 20 minutes later. I already knew where he was going, the hotel. I parked a block away and walked inside, heart pounding in my chest, but my face calm. I was ready for this. I stepped into the hotel lobby, scanned the room, and there they were, Daniel and Rachel, sitting at a table, leaning in close, whispering and smiling. I let the moment settle. Then I walked right up to them. Daniel? His head snapped up so fast I thought he might get whiplash. Rachel's eyes went wide. I smiled, the kind of smile that promised destruction. Funny running into you here, I said, setting my phone on the table. The screen lit up, showing a picture of his texts. Rachel stiffened. What is this? Daniel's face drained of color. I leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for both of them to hear. It's everything, darling, and it's already in my lawyer's hands. Daniel swallowed. Wait, let's talk. No need, I cut him off. You'll be hearing from me soon. And with that, I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't look back, because I had already won. I stared at the blank document on my laptop screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was it, the moment I had been planning for weeks. My decision was final, yet my heart still pounded with the weight of it. I took a deep breath, then began typing the email. The subject line was simple but firm. Resignation notice. As I typed, my mind replayed the events of the past few months. My husband, Daniel, had completely checked out of our marriage. His late nights, the suspicious messages, the dismissiveness. It had all built up until I could no longer ignore the truth. He had someone else, and worse, he didn't even bother hiding it anymore. The way he smirked when he came home at dawn, reeking of perfume that wasn't mine. The way he rolled his eyes whenever I asked him where he had been. The way he treated me like a stranger in my own home while he whispered into his phone late at night. I had swallowed my pride, my pain, and my dignity for too long. But not anymore. This wasn't just about leaving him. This was about taking back control. My job had been the last piece of the puzzle. I had secured a remote position with a company out of state, far from Daniel, far from the life I no longer recognized. I wasn't just walking away from my marriage. I was disappearing. A loud ding startled me from my thoughts. I glanced at my phone and saw a message from Daniel. Daniel. Hey, order some takeout for me. Won't be home until late. Again. No explanation, no apology. Just another night of him prioritizing someone else over me. My grip on the phone tightened as a bitter laugh escaped my lips. He was going to walk in tonight, expecting me to be waiting, expecting me to keep pretending that I didn't know. But he had no idea what was coming. I finalized the email, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. With one last deep breath, I pressed send. It was done. Now, all that was left was the final step. I had packed my essentials the night before, important documents, clothes, valuables. Everything else I would leave behind like a ghost. My lawyer had already filed the divorce papers, and by the time Daniel even realized what was happening, I would be long gone. The best part? He wouldn't be able to stop me. I had emptied our joint account earlier that day, taking only what was rightfully mine. Daniel had never noticed how much of his financial power he had relinquished to me, too busy chasing his new thrill to pay attention. That mistake would cost him. As the hours ticked by, I went through the motions for the last time in this house. I cooked dinner, though I had no intention of eating with him. I set the table, though I wouldn't be there to clean it. I even placed a bottle of his favorite whiskey on the counter, a silent farewell to the man who had destroyed our marriage. Then I sat down and waited. At 11:47 p.m., I heard his car pull into the driveway. The front door creaked open, and his footsteps echoed down the hall. "Babe?" His voice was casual, as if he hadn't just spent another evening wrapped around someone else. I didn't answer. He walked into the kitchen, stopping short when he saw me sitting there. His brows furrowed. "Why are you just sitting there?" I tilted my head, studying him. "I was waiting for you." Something in my voice made him pause. For the first time in months, I saw something flicker in his eyes, unease. He tossed his keys onto the counter and sighed. "Look, I don't want to fight tonight, okay? I'm tired." I nodded slowly. "Me too." Silence. Daniel moved to grab the whiskey, but I reached out and slid an envelope across the counter. His name was written on the front in my handwriting. His eyes narrowed. "What's this?" "Open it." He hesitated before ripping it open. His gaze flicked over the divorce papers, his grip tightening. He let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "Is this a joke?" I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. "Do I look like I'm joking?" His smirk faltered. "You can't be serious." I exhaled, feeling an unfamiliar sense of calm settle over me. "I was serious when I married you, Daniel. But you stopped being serious about us a long time ago." He threw the papers onto the counter, his jaw clenched. "So what? You think you can just leave?" I smiled. "I already have." His eyes darkened. "And you think you're going to take my money? My house?" I tilted my head. "Your money? Your house?" I let out a soft chuckle. "You stopped paying attention, Daniel. You stopped noticing how I handled all our finances, how I was the one making sure things stayed afloat while you were out playing games." His lips parted slightly as the realization began to dawn on him. "I didn't take anything that wasn't mine," I continued. "I just made sure you didn't take anything that wasn't yours." Daniel's face twisted in anger. "You think you're so damn smart, don't you?" I stood, grabbing my bag. "No, Daniel, I just stopped being stupid." As I walked past him, he grabbed my wrist, his grip tight. Part 7. The Aftermath and the Unexpected Call. I had expected relief to come instantly, but as I drove away from the house I had once called home, my emotions remained tangled in a complicated mess. The weight of years spent in a loveless marriage should have evaporated the moment I left, but instead, I felt a strange numbness settling in. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was the quiet after the storm. Or maybe it was just exhaustion after carrying so much pain for so long. Still, I kept driving, watching the city lights blur through my windshield. My new life awaited me. The apartment was ready. My job was secured. The divorce papers were filed. I had done everything right. So why did my hands still tremble on the steering wheel? I gritted my teeth and turned up the radio, drowning out the nagging doubts in my mind. There was no room for second-guessing. I had made my decision, and for the first time in a long time, I had done something for me. Daniel had already stolen enough of my years. He wasn't going to take another second of my peace. By the time I reached my apartment, it was past midnight. The building was quiet, and as I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My suitcase was already there, waiting for me, along with my neatly folded resignation letter. I had walked away from everything, my marriage, my old job, my past, and I didn't regret it. At least, that's what I told myself. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling, letting the silence wash over me. This was it, my new beginning. I should have felt lighter, freer. Instead, my mind swirled with memories of Daniel's face when he read the divorce papers, the way his smug confidence had crumbled into something raw and panicked, the way he had tried, for the first time in years, to reach for me, only to realize I was already gone. I had won. Then why did it feel so empty? I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, my phone was ringing. I jolted upright, my heart pounding as I fumbled for it on the coffee table. My eyes flicked to the screen, expecting to see an unknown number, or maybe my lawyer. Instead, I froze. Daniel. I stared at the name flashing across the screen. My stomach twisted. He hadn't called me in months, not when he started staying out late, not when I stopped asking where he was, not even when he realized I had taken everything that was mine. Why now? My thumb hovered over the decline button. I should ignore it, block his number, move on. But something made me hesitate. Curiosity, closure, or maybe I just wanted to hear the defeat in his voice. Taking a slow breath, I pressed accept and lifted the phone to my ear. Silence. For a moment, all I could hear was his breathing. It was uneven, almost shaky. That was new. Daniel was always composed, always arrogant. But now... "Daniel," I said finally, my voice steady. He exhaled sharply. "You actually answered." I leaned back against the couch. "Don't get used to it." A bitter chuckle. "Yeah, I figured." More silence. Then softly, "I messed up, didn't I?" The question caught me off guard. Not because it wasn't obvious, but because I had never expected him to admit it. I swallowed. "That depends." "Are you asking because you actually regret it, or because you thought I'd never leave?" His silence was answer enough. I closed my eyes, shaking my head. "You don't get to do this, Daniel. You don't get to break everything and then act like you suddenly care when I finally walk away." "I do care," he said, his voice raw in a way I had never heard before. I don't know when I stopped showing it." I let out a dry laugh. "A long time ago." He inhaled sharply. "I thought you'd always be there." There it was, the truth, the real reason he was calling. He hadn't expected me to leave. He had taken my loyalty for granted, assumed I would keep enduring, keep forgiving, keep staying. He had played his game, believing I would never be strong enough to walk away. And now, for the first time, he was realizing just how wrong he had been. I let the silence stretch, giving him a chance to feel it, to understand the emptiness he had created. Then finally I spoke. "I hope you learned something from this, Daniel. But I'm not coming back." He let out a shaky breath, as if he already knew what I was going to say, but had still hoped for a different answer. "I?" His voice broke off. He cleared his throat, then tried again. "I miss you." I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no nostalgia. Just nothing. I exhaled slowly. "You miss the idea of me. You miss the version of me who waited for you, who loved you even when you didn't deserve it. But that woman doesn't exist anymore." He didn't respond. I nodded to myself, gripping the phone tighter. "Goodbye, Daniel." Then I hung up, and just like that, I was finally free. Sometimes we don't realize how much we've lost ourselves in a relationship until we finally walk away. For too long, I let love blind me to the truth. I was fighting for someone who never truly fought for me. But the moment I chose myself, the moment I stopped begging for his attention and started valuing my own worth, everything became clear. This story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about self-respect, about knowing when to stop trying to fix what was never meant to be whole. It's about realizing that sometimes the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's walking away with your head held high, knowing that you gave your best to someone who didn't deserve it. So what do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to walk away from someone who took you for granted? Have you ever found strength in leaving, even when it was hard? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. Follow Scylla Reddit Stories for the next part of this journey. You won't want to miss what's coming next.